weapon will prosper. No enemy triumph. He will not overcome. He can't scale these walls. Injustice will not win. Hell's gates will not prevail. Not on my time. Not on my watch. I am a watchman, and I take my place. As I wait, I will keep the faith. 'Cause I am a watchman, and I stand my ground. But if I never see it, I will stay the course. I will run the race, I will fight the fight, and I will keep the faith. I keep my eyes fixed on you.
Well, good day, everybody. Welcome. Pastor Tim Carscadden here, Christian Center, Shreveport, doing our noon live stream, our noon prayer watch here on the 13th day of May, 2024. Wow, we've been doing this now almost 4 years of prayer at noon. We started, if you remember, July 4. I'll never forget it. We were at Mount Rushmore. The Lord told me to launch this pipeline ministry that we're doing, pipeline report, we're calling it now. And God gave me a dream and showed me President Trump and some other people in my ministry where we were going to build a pipeline. And you know what a pipeline does? You take something, you send it all the way down the line, whether it was oil or whatever, gas, whatever you're doing. And the Lord said we would start here. This would be our center point, and we would send the word out for prayer initiatives across the land, across the nations, and you guys are a part of that. So thank you for joining us. For some of you, for 4 years, you've been with us, and me and Zach been here for 4 years, but some of you have been partnering with us. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I don't know how much more I can do, but give my gratitude to you for being faithful to pray with us. As we try to give you initiatives and points, some of you have shared with us that we are your news source, and I don't plan on being that, but we do try to vet the news. Zach and I do, my son Zach and I do, where we try to let you know what's important, what's you can trust, and then also use it as a narrative for you to talk to other people about. I think that's the key thing for us. Zach is posting on the, I'll let him speak here in a minute, posting on the comments there of where we're going to be found. We are in a transition with this ministry, our Monday live streams especially. We're in a transition. We have, obviously Christian Center Shreveport's a local ministry, and we do work in the nations and all, and we have built a wonderful audience of people that follow us on all our social media platforms. And then we also have built this new platform, which is the pipeline report, we're calling it, which is the prayer initiatives and the prayer points, and also keeping you updated on world events and what we should be praying, especially concerning America. It is for the nations, yes, but it's for America, and how what is going on in the political arena as well as in the spiritual arena is affecting us as a nation. And we are in crisis today. Beyond belief. This is probably going to be one of the more important live streams we've done. I have Randy Grigsby with me and my son Zach, so we're going to get them here in just a minute and let them talk about some big issues that are facing us right now. I don't know of a bigger day for me. I'm on edge. I'm a bit excited as far as in the spirit realm of wanting to fight properly, hearing the Lord and fight. Now, we are. Like I said, we're doing a shift where we're going to let you watch us from. And some of you have been so faithful to watch us on YouTube and some of these channels we have, but we have been sharing them in a sense with Christian Center Shreveport. And it's very important for us to let our services, our ministry side, our our things that we do for ministry not be threatened. And unfortunately, Randy Grigsby and I have been guilty of causing some pain for YouTube and Facebook for our ministry as we talk. I think when I mention his name, algorithms go crazy, and next thing you know, we're being watched. And so we just got knocked last time Randy was with us, and so we're going to do this. We're going to bounce off of YouTube Christian Center Shreveport in just a minute, and I'm going to have Zach come on here and tell you all the platforms. Some of you are having a hard time finding us on Rumble, and he's been putting the comments there, but we'll explain to you why. We're going to talk mainly about Israel today and its role with America and our role in intercession. We're going to look at history and understand we are back at a moment in time that has happened before, and we don't want to miss this opportunity to pray and stand with what God is saying right now. So, having said that, I'm going to have Zach come on and explain the shift and where we're moving to, so you'll understand why and where we're going to be able to be found. So go ahead, Zach.
Yes. So apologies for everyone who's been trying to find us, especially for this, specifically this Monday live stream. And what we're doing is, as Pastor Tim said before, is we're separating our channels a little bit. We're creating a second channel. This is common to protect the main focus, the brand, the church. And so what we want to do is basically the apologetics versus the political. We want to separate. And so anywhere you want to find any church stuff, any teachings, biblical teaching, etc., stuff like that, it'll be Christian Center Shreveport on any of our social media, major social media that we're out there on. And anywhere where we're talking about political stuff, in order to protect that entity, we're going to put it on anything titled The Pipeline. So on YouTube, it's The Pipeline Report. On Rumble, it's The Pipeline Report. So if you prefer those channels, they'll be there. On Facebook, we're still sticking with the Christian Center page, and until we see a reason to pull from that, even though Facebook sometimes pulls some of those, we'll stay there at the Christian Center channel for now. If we ever cut that off, we'll let you know, as far as we'll only be on YouTube and or Rumble. So if you want to follow us on those channels on YouTube, and I put the links in the comment sections for both. So share, like, subscribe, that so you can be able to catch us for the rest of today's episode, and then for future episodes when we specifically deal with hard-hitting political issues.
Okay, thank you, Zach. And so we'll bounce off of YouTube Christian Center Shreveport right now. Zach will cut us off there. And so you'll follow, catch what he just said. Some of y'all tried to find us on on Rumble, Christian Center Shreveport page. We're not broadcasting there. We're broadcasting on the Pipeline Report on Rumble, same platform, just a different channel. It's called Pipeline Report. It'll have a little red icon. It'll say PR on there. And if you will, subscribe to that channel as well. That way you'll get notifications of that. And then, of course, we also are on YouTube, the Pipeline Report. So if you do like YouTube, you can go to YouTube, the Pipeline Report. Okay, that's what it's called. And it's a red icon, got PR there, so you can find us there as well. Okay, sorry for all the house cleaning issues. So let me know, are we off, Zach? Give me a thumbs up. Okay, we're off Facebook. Off of YouTube Christian Center. So welcome. Now we have freedom to talk a little bit more freely as what's going on here. As you know, we are the president has become a very big obstacle concerning what's going on in Israel. And this is Anthony Blinken. I want to play one quick thing here before I bring Randy on. This is what he is saying, and this is something we need to talk about because of what his suggestions are, what's happening in Gaza. And then we're going to move forward and talk about the past and where we are today. So here's Anthony Blinken on Meet the Press yesterday. Just listen with an open mind.
We believe two things. One, you have to have a clear, credible plan to protect civilians, which we haven't seen. Mm-hmm. Second, we also need to see a plan for what happens after this conflict in Gaza is over. And we still haven't seen that, because what are we seeing right now? We're seeing parts of Gaza that Israel has cleared of Hamas, where Hamas is coming back.
Right.
including in the north, including in Khan Yunis. As we look at Rafah, they may go in and have some initial success, but potentially at an incredibly high cost to civilians, but one that is not durable, one that's not sustainable. And they will be left holding the bag on an enduring insurgency because a lot of armed Hamas will be left, no matter what they do in Rafah. Or if they leave and get out of Gaza, as we believe they need to do, then you're going to have a vacuum, and a vacuum that's likely to be filled by chaos, by anarchy, and ultimately by Hamas again.
So there you go. That's Anthony Blinken giving his perspective on what's going on there. And obviously, he tells them to get out of Gaza, and then he tells them that'll leave a vacuum. You can't have it both ways. Listen to double speak there of what he's saying. And the fact is that casualties of the civilians, which he's speaking about, we're finding out the United Nations came back today and announced that their numbers are cut in half of what they've been reporting, because they said there's a fog of war. And those numbers, Zach, speak to those numbers, how they're not even plausible, what the numbers they're throwing up. It's not even plausible what they're saying.
Yeah, so I've looked at some of the statistics and heard major statistical analysis on this, where when you actually look at, you take it quote unquote proportionally to the entire populations in those regions, what they're saying is that of the men, women, and children, because they're focusing on the women and children portion of the men, women, and children, they're saying that Israel is killing upwards of 75 to like 95% of the women and children who live in those areas, which we know is not statistically is impossible because they're evacuating them, one. But then in two is they're not finding the bodies of the women and children that supposedly are dying. And this is where the UN, through the quote unquote fog of war, is having to kind of bite back and swallow a big humility pill here, because remember, this is the first scope that these organizations are actually looking into the death tolls. So this is the first scope, and they've already, of the women and children portion of it, wiped it in half. And they know that they have to do more analysis, but they know that as long as you spread the time frame out over long, people are going to get disinterested and only stay focused on the initial numbers. And so this is very problematic. People have known this for a while, but the administration, the UN, and obviously Hamas have been pushing a certain narrative for, obviously we understand, particular reasons. But the reality is that, unfortunately, the statistical reality, just on the baseline of that, is impossible, because the women and children aren't even there. And sometimes the death tolls in certain regions are more than the children and women who are actually there. So they're saying, 110% of the women and children who live here are dying. Well, that's a statistical anomaly in and of itself. So there's some huge problems with that. And this has been known for quite some time. And it's good to see it kind of come to light. But the reality is has the damage already been done?
Yep. And so this is the unraveling of the plans of the enemy. We've been prophesying, Chuck and Pierce and Dutch Sheets gave in April. So we're actually seeing that. So I have my friend Randy Grigsby with us. Yesterday was Memorial Day for Israel, and they remembered their lost soldiers through all the wars, especially the 1948 war, which was big. And I've asked Randy to speak to the parallels that was happening then and what is happening now. It is shocking. It's overwhelming what we're seeing here. And so, Randy, if you'll pop on here with us. Zach, there we go. And we welcome him from South Shreveport. He's just a little bit, about 4 or 5 miles down here south of me. But we're so glad you're with us, Randy. So why don't you speak to what happened in Memorial Day, 1948, and the parallels you're seeing between then and now?
See, Pastor Tim, there's really not a lot of difference between what's happening now and what has happened in the past with Israel. I think the mistake the Biden administration is making is they're not applying this historical concept to it, that Israel doesn't fight normal wars like everyone else. Israel fights every war for survival, and no more so than in 1948. So it's a good way to lay a foundation to understand what's going on now. And for some people who don't know, I'll give a little more information, and we'll build a good foundation to move here from, and see the parallels a little later in the description. But this is 1947, November 29. The UN did the partition agreement that they were going to divide up the land of Palestine after the British mandate ended. And immediately the Arabs, who or in fact, during the partition map, we're going to get a larger area than the Israelis, but then it created a lot of Arab violence, and that started what was a civil war that lasted from November until May the 14th, 1948. And like any civil war, it was bloody. There were retaliations among the societies, the Arab and the Jewish societies, and it created by May of 14th, this was turning into a bloodbath in a lot of cases. Civilians on both sides were massacred, as all civil wars turned that way. Then on May the 14th, 1948, the last British soldier left at midnight. The British mandate was over, and David Ben-Gurion had planned to declare independence. And they declared independence on that day in the afternoon. And 5 Arab armies were prepared to attack them. 5 Arab armies that totaled almost 60,000 troops. And Israel had managed to prepare for war with somewhere around 27,000.
Wow.
A third of those actually had weapons. And a good part of those were concentration camp survivors that were shipped over from Cyprus by the British government and let loose on the shores of Palestine. So, they still had their concentration camp clothes on, and they were sending them forward even without ammunition. So if you compare the numbers, it's probably more like Israel had 10 to 15,000 fighting troops compared to 60,000. They had no tanks, no planes, no artillery, and very few anti-tank or anti-artillery weapons. The Arab army had 260 tanks, 150 artillery pieces, and 300 aircraft. So this was overwhelmingly outnumbered. And Israel, of course, as everyone knows, declared their independence that day. And on May the 15th, the next morning at dawn, the Arab armies began their attack. And it was not supposed to last very long at all. Let me read you a quote. What kind of war would this be, 1948? Well, David Ben-Gurion asked his chief of staff, General Aden, what's the chances of us surviving? And Aden said, at the very best, our chances are 50-50. And he didn't really believe that. But here's a quote from Asham Pash, the Secretary General of the Arab League, that night after they declared their independence. He said, this will be a war of extermination and monumentous massacre, which will be spoken of like the Mongolian massacres and the Crusades. Now, the reason I put that up there is because this is what Israel faces every day in every war. That's what their purpose is. But in spite of the fact that the Arab armies attacked, there were 5 overwhelming numbers and all the air support and everything, Israel actually began to get some momentum in this thing, and they began to have some victories. They had a lot of defeats, and they had a lot of standoffs. And as in Jerusalem had the best Arab armies. They were Jordanians. They were trained by the British. And all that General Alon and those men in the northern sector could hope for was just a standoff. But they began to gain momentum. And here's the amazing thing, and this is the thing you want us to bring up and discuss today. As they began to gain momentum and begin to put a little bit of traction into maybe having some success in this war, then ceasefires were demanded by the UN, and they were backed by the United States, and they were backed by Great Britain. Now, let me back up just for a moment. 10 minutes after Israel declared their independence, Harry Truman recognized Israel. Russia did it 3 days later, but Harry Truman did it within 10 minutes. And they asked him, why did you do this? He said, because my mother told me to read the Bible every day. So that gave him a foundation on what he should do correctly. The problem is 14 days later, the United Nations, endorsed by the UK and the United States, placed an embargo on the war. And they did it in a way that made it sound generous, all belligerent factors. So that means no arms could go to anyone. The problem there was Israel was the only one that didn't have weapons. The Arab armies were armed. So this affected, it's this very same thing we're talking about now. They recognized Israel as an independent nation, and then 14 days later, with the embargo, did not send any weapons to the Israelis. So you might ask, for people that haven't studied this, how did they get these weapons? Well, Ben Gurion for a year had been setting up networks in Europe, and they were buying Messerschmitt planes in Czechoslovakia. They were buying rifles. Matter of fact, when they flew the planes back, they still had swastikas on them when they flew into Palestine. And some of the Jewish pilots even wore flight suits with the Luftwaffe symbols on there. That's how quickly this thing was developing. They were buying weapons, surplus weapons. The United States had volunteers coming in. They would take planes apart in America, put them in crates, mark them as food or baby supplies or milk or something, get them to Israel, and then they would assemble them into fighter planes. So that's what Israel was facing under this embargo. All these countries recognized them, but then they weren't going to support them in the fight. But as they began to gain this momentum and get weapons and planes, I think their first planes were 5 planes, and they painted the Star of David on it. They had no bombs to go in it, and machine guns didn't work, but they had planes with a Star of David on it. Then they began to hold the first truce. Now, the war started in May of 48. In June 11th, 1948, the UN called for a ceasefire, and it lasted 4 weeks. So all that did was it gave where Israel had forced out Israel off the lands, it gave them time to regroup and rebuild. Seeing Israel by that time had won a lot of villages in the southern sector. They opened up Jerusalem, which had been under siege without food or water. They opened up a road they called it the Burma Road, and they began to get supplies in. The UN called for a ceasefire. Then the war starts up again. Israel continues to win. They're beginning to win in central Galilee. They're beginning to take a lot of territory there, stabilizing it, a lot of towns outside of Jerusalem. And they were beginning to open up a corridor in through the Negev settlement. So they were really gaining momentum on winning the war. The second truce was called on July the 18th, 1948. So that gave the Egyptians time to build their forces up in the Negev. And so that's all these truces really do. It didn't create any peace. It didn't create anything but a halt in the war. And it always happened when Israel was winning.
Yep.
The final phase of the war was in October when General Alon attacked, and they were going to drive the Egyptians out of the Negev and win the war. So guess what? They start driving the Egyptians out, and the UN wants a ceasefire. And Great Britain brings up a 1937 treaty they had with Egypt, that if Egypt were attacked, then Great Britain would fight with Egypt to protect them. Now, what General Alon, the commander of the Southern Front, did was once they drove Egypt out of the Negev and back across the border, he actually penetrated into Sinai, which was against what they were supposed to do, but his purpose was to make sure there was no reinforcements or no follow-up by the Egyptian army in that case. So they called for ceasefires 3 times in this war, and every time it was the Arabs that benefited from it by rearming and so on.
What's interesting right now, and he makes a great point, everybody listen, that every time Israel starts winning, ceasefires come up and are beginning to talk. Now, there's also reports, if you don't know, there's a peace treaty with Egypt that goes back 50 years, I believe. I'm not sure exactly where it started, But now the Jerusalem Post is reporting that they're threatening to suspend the treaty over Israel going into Rafah. So there's a lot of political pressure, obviously, on them. And I think, Egypt's a non-entity. I can't believe they would get involved. They have enough internal problems as where they are now without having to get in a fight with Israel during this season. So here we go. We're starting to see the pressure. Obviously, this is an antichrist spirit. This is a spirit that wants to see the Jews destroyed. This is what we're dealing with here. And our portion as Americans, this is our portion. This is what I wanted Randy to share with us, is that we are placing America under judgment by not standing with covenant Israel. The land that you're talking about in Gaza, which is, according to Genesis, in book of Genesis, is supposed to be part of Israel. So we know that we have a biblical stance to stand and say, no, they need to fight for it. Now, we're not advocating getting rid of all the Arabs out of the country, et cetera. We're not here to say that. There's a whole sojourning part of this piece that we're not even talking about. But it's a reality of the fact that we believe that God has a plan for that territory, and we as Americans do not want to interfere with God's plans. For if we do, we will face a backlash in the spirit, that the Antichrist spirit will have freedom and free reign on America. We know the prophecies about the Madrid fault. We know about other prophecies that are happening across the land. We can expect, I want you to understand this, we can expect an increase of judgment the longer this administration, Biden administration, stands against Israel, withholds it. Now, what the most alarming part is the fact that America has threatened, Blinken did it, has threatened that they will not give the information where the Hamas senior leaders are in Rafah unless they get out. So now put that in perspective. How long have they known, number one? Because the whole goal of Israel is to remove the leadership and to remove the top leaders of Israel. I mean, of Hamas. So here you go. It tells you the intelligence America has that revelation and is withholding intelligence. I mean, what does that mean, Randy? When you look at that politically or diplomatically, whatever, that you have a partner, an ally who has critical intelligence of the very war that you're in that could shorten the war. Okay. They could shorten it drastically if we just had that intelligence, and they're withholding. What does that speak to you?
Well, actually, there's another comparison in late 1948 when General Allen's tanks were at the Egyptian border and he was going to swing north and take El Arish, and that would cut, as we call it, as we describe wars, and cut the head of the snake if he goes in and splits El Arish. And today there would not be a problem in Gaza if he had been allowed to do that. But they had personally, the ambassador of the United States, who got along with Ben-Gurion, placed a personal call to him and told him, you've got to pull your people back right here at the last as you're winning and stabilizing everything. But this tells me that the United States is now, as of today, more aligned with Hamas than they are with Israel. If they have information that they're not passing on to them, it makes the United States look. It makes the United States look terrible. Who would be an ally of our country? I hate to say that, but if we know what we're dealing with here, I mean, is it possible that with that intelligence, how much did we know as United States the first week of October? How much did we know about that? Which was nothing. It was a military operation. It wasn't your standard Hamas, put the rockets in. This was a military operation with paratroopers, trained, money's involved. How much did we know? How far back do we go from holding information back from? So here's what we're doing. This is what you just described. We're holding secret information back. We want them to change governments. We want to throw Netanyahu out. This is the leader of the only democracy in the Middle East and our ally. And we want to take him out because they know Netanyahu, like Zach said, he understands the history. He fought in the history of this. Netanyahu's autobiography is a great book to read if someone wants to get down to the nuts and bolts. And he opened up in October when they set and prepared themselves to respond. And then when they did, what did Netanyahu opened up with a scripture out of the book. Thank you, Lord, that you have given us hands for battle.
Yes.
And our fingers are for swords. And it's out of, I think, the book of Psalm. He opened with that. And I don't know where to go with this. I mean, we compared in 1948, but here's the thing that I've gotten from it. And I went into CBN and I did research on that, knowing we were going to talk today. The Israeli military knows they're saying they've got the ammunition and they've got to finish Gaza. The problem is in the northern part. The upcoming war with Hezbollah is going to be along a lot larger scale. It's a larger battlefield. And so now that's where we get into trouble. And then the true enemies of Israel are now seeing they have no one covering their back. They have no ally if the United States continues to do this. They don't know the historical context of wars that Israel is forced to fight, or they wouldn't be doing this.
Go ahead, Zach.
Yeah, to kind of go back to what's coming out of the United States right now, I think a big question is, and we're seeing this from the Biden administration, is what the Biden administration is putting out reality? Because to play devil's advocate a little bit, we have to realize that now the obviously Obama 3.0 administration that we have here with the Biden administration is they're being called the Biden holdovers, the Obama holdovers, Obama alumni within the administration, and we know they're caving to a growing demographic within the United States of those who want to support, whether it be Arabs, whether it be Christians who would side with Hamas, and or even Jews, as you're seeing in a lot of these campus protests. Is the big question we have to ask is one, does Israel not have this information already, or do they know, like Netanyahu's operating from, like we just said, they can win wars without the United States. It's been a while, but they've done it. Netanyahu's operating from that. And is the Biden administration trying to portray to that growing demographic that, hey, yeah, I'm standing with you, I'm standing against Israel? Is it all just a smokescreen to stir up confusion? And you see that when Paul in Acts 20, when he was about to be executed by the Jews, there is it was a stir up, it was a confusion brought up, and that same word for stir up and confusion is the same in the Greek language there. So there's something spiritual going on here where the Biden administration is again playing devil's advocate here. I have no information to know whether this is true or not. It's just what I'm discerning is that, like, there's a possibility that this may not be true, because how can Israel, when they go into Rafah, know exactly where to go into to cut off the tunnels, partial of the tunnels that lead from Rafah into Egypt? And even let's think about the actual intelligence of when Israel attacked Iran. The significance of that attack was so magnificent that it showed Iran, even when you send, there's estimates of upwards of 600 rockets that were initially launched, but 300 entered into other airspaces, that you can send those, but all we need is this one. And so there is hope there that, okay, the Lord's obviously standing with his promise and his covenant there. So I just want to add that perspective there.
And let's talk about this as well. Think about what this administration is doing. Biden administration is empowering Hamas, is empowering Iran, is empowering Hezbollah, because now you have somebody who's going to protect you, protect where you are, where you're hiding, everything that you're planning. That they have intelligence and they're not sharing it with their enemy. And I think Randy brought this up as well, that Schumer has already said it. Senator Schumer, they want to see Netanyahu removed from office. They want to overthrow this government. They wouldn't call it overthrow. They'd call it early elections. but it's an overthrow. I think it's seditious to even talk about it. How would he like if Netanyahu says we need an early election to remove Schumer, an early election to remove Biden? Oh, they'd go have convincing fit, just with that type of conversation on a public platform. And here they did it nationwide, internationally, and said that. So here you got this battle. So I'm trying to help you with prayer initiatives. This is the scope. They want to overthrow the government. There's a unity in Israel only because of the massacre of October 7. You got to understand this. Without that massacre, there would not be unified. They would not be unified in Israel right now. You'd still have the segments of the left and the right, and they're trying to overthrow the government there. So what's going to happen in the future is unknown, because you got the pressure from America. Hamas is being protected by the American administration, being protected in Qatar, being protected all around the world. I guarantee you, Israel does have a plan. I've been briefed by some of the people I'm working with, does have a plan, regardless of what Blinken said, for what's going to happen after the war. I promise you, they're not going to just take out their enemy and let him stay in power. They do have a plan, so we're going to talk about that. But let's talk about the Zach. You want anything for a shift?
Go ahead. I have a question for Randy later.
Okay. Let's talk about what the view here about these weapons. Let's talk about this a little bit. Lindsey Graham talks about this on Meet the Press.
Does Israel need the most massive bombs that can potentially level an entire block in order to wage this war? Why can't it be more precise?
Listen, here's what I would say about fighting an enemy who wants to kill you and your family. Why did we drop 2 bombs, nuclear bombs, on Hiroshima and Nagasaki to end a war that we couldn't afford to lose? You don't understand, apparently, what Israel is facing. They're facing 3 groups. Iran, who has received $80 billion in aid. When Trump left office, they were exporting 300 barrels of oil a day. Now they're at 1.3 million a day. They've been enriched by Biden. They're taking that money to kill all the Jews. So when we were faced with destruction as a nation after Pearl Harbor, fighting the Germans and the Japanese, we decided to end the war by bombing Hiroshima and Nagasaki with nuclear weapons. That was the right decision. Give Israel the bombs they need to end the war they can't afford to lose, and work with them to minimize casualties.
Senator,
okay, so there's a strong. Lindsey's always going to say the outrageous sometimes, but speak to that, Randy. What that speaks to you?
Well, I think the whole thing is really. I think the Biden administration is out of touch on it with everyone. I think the Biden administration not only is totally out of touch with what Israel is faced with. I don't know that they can realize what Lindsey Graham just said and say the things they do, but they're also out of touch with the Arab world. It's a known fact. The Arab world is more comfortable with Israel being the only nuclear power in the Middle East than for Iran to have a nuclear power. I think that's common now. It's just a lot of things we see in the Middle East now are going to be theater. Like when Israel went into Rafah and cut off the border to Egypt, Egypt said they vehemently disagreed with what Israel did. But I think really deep down inside, Egypt doesn't want Hamas to cross the border into their country. I think there's a lot of theater that goes on now with that. The thing, they're out of touch with the Arabs even, I believe, in the way that they're trying to manage this war. And one thing that the Israeli military is saying is going to have the opposite effect. You're worried about casualties. The longer a war goes on, the more casualties you're going to have. And the Israeli military is saying what Biden's trying to do is only going to extend the war.
That's right.
Then you're going to have more civilians die in war. It's a horrible fact, but it's going to happen no matter how much Israel. They text, they phone, they drop messages, they set up safe zones. Israel does everything they can to try to save innocent life. I've spoken about this in the 67 war when they knew that the Arabs and the Syrians had planes ready in an offensive position. and Israel goes in the night before and totally destroys the Egyptian planes on the tarmacs. They knew when the work crews were going to be in working on the planes, and they attacked while the Egyptian crews weren't there working, so they wouldn't kill civilian mechanics working on the Egyptian. That's how much they value life. But people are going to die. You want a war to be over as soon as possible to do this. But the Biden administration's out of touch with, I think, the whole world. In that, Zach was talking about Obama. He came up, he did the Iran nuclear deal.
Yep.
780 million in foreign aid, which is okay, but you got to have checks and balances on where does this money go. Now, that's a lot. 780 million is a lot of money. And to not know where it was going to go, and odds are it went to build the tunnels and it went to build the bombs and so on. So it's just it's a quagmire of a decision to do this. When if they supported Israel, I think the war would probably be over within a month.
Exactly. Go ahead, Zach.
Yeah, to add to the casualty aspect of this is when the way to break this down of the weapons that the Biden administration is withholding from Israel are what would be called smart bombs. You can get into logistics of what that really means, but what they're now sending them is dumb bombs. And so what that precisely means is if Israel is going to take out, let's say, unlike what this reporter from Meet the Press said, of blowing up entire bombs, which is that's a different subject, because those aren't even the weapons being discussed right now. Is the weapons that are being discussed is the smart bombs could go in and precisely take out a room in a building where a terrorist is to prevent other casualties of civilians who are living in a building who are being held against their will and or are living there because they don't want to leave for whatever reason. Sometimes people get stubborn in the Middle East. It's just part of life. But what the administration is allowing to go through are dumb bombs that would, speaking to your point, cause more casualties of innocent civilians that they say, this big thing of, well, we want to protect, all the innocents. Well, this is ultimately backfiring, as a lot of people are saying here in the comments, towards the Biden administration of causing more casualties that they're supposedly, quote unquote, trying to prevent from occurring.
Wow. This is it is shocking. I mean, we're watching history, Randy. I mean, we're watching history right before our eyes. One, the tragedy of what this administration is doing, but two, it's a repeat. It's nothing new under the sun, as Solomon says. And so the hatred of God's covenant, let's put it in the perspective where it needs to be put. In the hatred of God's covenant, which whether they like it or not, as using the Jewish people to be the covenant bearers, us being joint heirs through Christ Jesus, are part of that covenant. But the fact is, if the church doesn't recognize that and separates Israel from itself, then they're missing the covenant purpose, because God never meant for Israel to stand alone. He had a mixed multitude, and that was the Gentiles. When Jesus said, the time would come where this gospel would go to the ends of the earth, then it has. And now we must partner with what God has said back in Genesis, which is for that land. I'm not talking about celebrating the Israeli military, celebrating Netanyahu and his government. I'm celebrating the covenant that God made. And we have a biblical responsibility. It's a biblical worldview is what we're dealing with here, of standing. And as Christians, if you try to separate that, you are functioning in some level of an anti-Semitic behavior, because you're not agreeing with the word of God. And that is very serious for us, because we face judgment if we do that. That's Joel chapter 3 says it very clearly. And I keep hearing the dream that Chris Reed had ringing in my ears. He saw a headline that said 2-state solution has been reached. And the only way that's going to be reached, if you ask me, is if America is involved. And we've got to get America uninvolved in this issue, and to make sure that we stay on the wall for that. So anything else you want to add to this, Randy, before we shift out of here?
Well, the thing that the enemy, I'll use a general term, the enemies of Israel never seem to grasp is exactly what you're talking about. When the IDF and those soldiers go into battle, they're fighting under God's covenant that will never be broken. And that changes the whole perspective. There's the natural part of war that we've been discussing. Then there's the spiritual part of fighting a war against Israel. And we've talked about all the miracles that happened during all these wars that they fought. Just take the miracle, the one we just discussed, 1948.
Yeah.
No tanks, no artillery, nothing. They got everything they needed. Like Ben Gurion said, if you're going to be a Jew, you have to believe in miracles. And of course, time after time, in the 1948 war, Israel was holding a hill and they were about to lose it. And the Jordanian troops were attacking. And they knew that if they attacked one more time, they wouldn't have enough ammunition to hold the Jordanians. The Jordanians come halfway up the hill and they stop and they retreat. Years later, an Israeli and a Jordanian who fought on separate sides of that battle met. And he said, if you had attacked us one more time, we would have been finished. Why did you stop? And the Jordanian soldier said, we looked up in the sky and we saw Abraham. They saw Abraham in the sky and they refused to attack soldiers where they saw that image in the clouds. That's that. When we talk about the covenant, that's what we're talking about. Wars are fought naturally. Israeli wars are fought naturally and spiritually.
And so now it's coming home. And this is what I want to speak to as we close out today. It's coming home. Now, I had a dream 2 years ago, I think it was, or so. And in my dream, I was looking at downtown Nashville. And in this dream, I saw an explosion of a building in Nashville, downtown Nashville. And then right after that, I saw Hamas handing out flyers, inviting people to be a part of the Hamas movement. Now, a couple of years ago, I'm like, okay, they could be secret sleeper cells here, et cetera. I didn't know exactly what that was about, but I do know that. And then I wake up from the dream. Then that morning, just a few hours later, there's an explosion, a terrorist explosion in downtown Nashville. Now, it wasn't Hamas that we know of, but there was an explosion. I think the Lord was saying, this is very important. Watch this. So we had about a 2-year base. So now I'll play this video. And somebody sent me this morning. I didn't know what it was about. They just sent this to me. This is Robert Stearns, a big Israel supporter. I've seen him minister in Israel, big connection with the Israeli government and Israelis, both Jews and Christians in Messianics in Israel. And he put this report out this morning. I want you to listen to this.
In Nashville right now. Daniel, please text our Nashville friends and have them tune in right now, please. Here we go. Pro-Hamas thugs force Nashville hotel to cancel pro-Israel event. Now, I want you to listen carefully to what has happened in real time. This happened late Friday afternoon. Very interesting timing. They did it when it was too late in the day at the end of the week for anyone to do anything. Listen to what's happened. Last week, pro-Hamas thugs began calling the Sonesta Hotel in Nashville, Tennessee. This is the Sonesta Airport Hotel. There's 3 locations. It's the Airport Hotel in Nashville, Tennessee. Pro-Hamas thugs began calling the hotel, threatening the hotel with violence if they did not cancel their contract with Hayovel. Hayovel is a Tennessee-based Christian ministry that has a base in Israel that was coming back and hosting a pro-Israel conference in Nashville. Thank you, Jonathan Landis, for tuning in. Please share this. The Israel Summit is scheduled for May 20th, 21st, and 22nd. Now, right now, I want to tell you, I'm going. I don't care if we meet in a parking lot. I don't care if we stop traffic in the middle of the interstate. I'm going. I'm getting on a plane and I'm going. May 20th, 21st, and 22nd. I want to invite you to join me there. The Israel Summit was scheduled as a peaceful gathering intending to educate Christians on fighting anti-Semitism and their connection to the Holy Land. On May the 10th, after speaking with the local police, the hotel leadership contacted Hayovel, notifying them that they were canceling their contract. This was a signed legal contract that the hotel, days before the event, with over 400 people pre-registered, canceled the contract, notifying them the contract was canceled because the police were concerned that the hotel, their guests, other local businesses, and attendees to the summit would be in physical danger due to the nature of the calls and messages that had been received from the pro-Hamas supporters. Yair Levy has just tuned in on Facebook. Yair,
Okay, we're going to stop right there and just let's speak to this for just a second. This is shocking. This is where I say, you guys, people say, oh, y'all are always Israel focused. No, we are focused because that's what happens if we don't become focused. We're going to start seeing this now. Israeli anti-Israeli protesters on all these campuses are being protected. But we can't protect 400 Christians and Jews meeting together peacefully. We can't protect them, but we can protect these things. Now, I'll add this. Randy, I want you to speak this. George Washington University, just this last week, arrested 33 anti-Israel protesters on the campus, 33, because of the what they were doing, the violence and all the vandalism, etc. Of the 33, only 6 of them were students. Only 6 of them. The rest of them were not even students. These are professional protesters. Soros and other groups are sending in there to protest. They're actually professional. We have now, Wall Street Journal reported, these were planned 2 to 3 months ago. They went on these campuses and started planning these protests 2 to 3 months ago. They put in professional protesters, some of them 40 years old and older, to be on the campuses, have nothing to do with the campus whatsoever, not even former alumni, and they're in there instigating this stuff. And everybody thinks these are these students, these innocent students who just want to have a voice and practice their First Amendment rights, and it's not true. We expose it right now in the name of Jesus. We expose what is happening there, and we're not going to allow this to go out on the airways without somebody saying that's wrong, and we're going to pray accordingly. Speak to that, Randy, and then Zach, you speak after him.
Well, we have just stepped into the 1930s Germany stage. And it's a very large stage that's being created for us right now. We have to gather our strength as a nation. We can't afford to be lackadaisical or appeasing as we saw Britain and America in the 1930s. This is the same spirit that has risen up before. And the spirit is really having its way now, and it's building a large stage. This is part of that. Without October the 7th, this wouldn't be happening.
That's right.
Without the Biden administration threatening Israel, other things probably won't be starting to come. And then you've got China and you have Russia that are just sitting back and looking at this all coming unraveled, the streets of America becoming violent. It's a large stage that we don't have a lot of time to really approach this in the right way. We need to repent, and we need to grow strong, and we need to stand up. And Pastor Tim, I remember, your message yesterday about this young generation and the young generation in our church. I agree with that totally. I watched the revival that took place in Kentucky last year. And it was the night when they took the elderly people, the older people in the middle of the church, and they prayed for us to stand up, our generation,
Yes.
the baby boomer generation, I think it was. We still have the strength to do this, but it's really going unabated, I think. I mean, there's pockets of arrest, and they're uncovering that it's not students, but it's got its momentum now. It's got its feet on the ground over in this. Things that I always say this, Henrietta Zoe that I wrote about, what would the Zionists of the 1930s, Henrietta Zoe, have thought if they came back in time as a time traveler and saw what we see unfolding on our college campuses? And It's one of the mountains that we've given away since the 1960s.
Yep. Okay, go ahead, Zach.
Yeah, just to keep it short, is kind of the focus to bring it into today's age for our generation and my generation, my kids' generation, is this is where we have to, as Proverb talks about, father the next generation. And what that fathering is interceding and praying and teaching and leading them to uphold Judeo-Christian values. And for those who believe this side that it's okay to not stand for truth and have literally no morals whatsoever, is the question I think something we have to focus on is how long will the Lord allow them to stay in this? And for us as believers, one thing we have to fight against is what we see in Daniel 7:25, where it talks about the changing times and seasons, and the how the spirit there that Daniel's dealing with was meant to wear down the saints and wear down the believers. And so we have to remember that this is a spiritual battle, and sometimes that spiritual battle plays itself out in the flesh. And the
Yes.
focus that we have to stay and trust and put our hope in is in the Lord, of one, fathering the next generation, but ultimately having the faith that the Lord will, for those who have an open heart, whether they may be, because there are quote unquote Christians who live within Palestine. Some agree with what's going on with Hamas, some don't. There are other Arabs who agree and don't agree. There are Jews who agree and don't agree. And we just want to pray for those, pray for the salvation of those to be awake and have the veil removed, so that they can have that relationship with the Father. But ultimately, is would we, a question for ourselves is, why would God allow this to happen? Is for Arabs in the Middle East and those in the Middle East, is this may be the only thing for them to start to question that, because now is they're at that near death experience proportion of, hey, if I make
Yes.
this decision, if I stand with this organization, I could possibly lose my life. And then now they start to question. Whereas if they're sitting back comfortable, everything's quote unquote at peace, even though really wasn't, is where they just are comfortable just to slide their way into hell, to be blunt about it. And so is the beauty of this, in a sense, to take some positive fruit from this, is that the Lord could be causing this, and I believe is causing this situation to touch hearts of those in the Middle East. And the question for us is, at what point, for Arabs and Jews alike, is this touching that part of their conscience that, all right, that they've been avoiding for some time? And that's what we want to pray for, that the Lord can come in and touch. And we know for some soldiers on both sides, Arab and Israeli, and for Hamas, that Jesus is showing himself through dreams and visions and encounters that they're having. So that's kind of
Yes.
the positive takeaway from all this.
Yep. And I just posted on our chat line there Randy Grigsby's book, This Labyrinth of Darkness and Light, Henrietta Zoll, The Rescued Children from Hitler's Europe and Her Palestine Experience. He also has another book he wrote called A Train to Palestine. You can go on Amazon. I put the link there. I encourage you to buy that and share that with your friends, as well as I put the links in there for that video I just showed from Robert Stearns concerning the events in Nashville. If you're in the Tennessee area, please contact your governor, contact your congressmen, your senators, let them know what's going on in Nashville. Ask for there to be a movement of standing up for our First Amendment rights and fighting for that. Thank you, Randy, for being with us today.
Sure.
I
Thank you.
appreciate you, and thank you for sharing your insight. We love you. So y'all, thanks for Randy. Bless you, brother. And so as we, I wish I could do that in real life sometimes, just click and people have to walk away from I wanted Randy to be here though. But anyway, we hope this has been informative today. It's an hour. I know most people don't want to listen an hour. If you forward this to your friend, they have to really have a love to listen to an hour. This generation, I mean, this society now wants everything in 12-minute or less bites, but there's no way to discuss this issue in 12 minutes. There's absolutely no way. So we feel like this is a way to inform your Christian friends on why we stand with Israel, covenant Israel, why we pray this way, why we put out prayer initiatives this way. Because if we don't, our nation is in peril. That's the ultimate thing. I'm not being selfish in this. I have a heart for Israel, but I also know that if we don't do this, we're going to suffer what's happening in Nashville. And as Randy said there very clearly, this is Germany all over again. This is the Kristallnacht, things like that started happening little by little. They eventually began to have this anti-Semitic rise until eventually there was concentration camps with both Gentiles and Christians as well as Jews. You got to understand this. Can you imagine being a pro-Israel, pro-covenant Israel person, and you were in Germany, and everybody knew like what we're doing right now? Everybody knew what we were doing, and then they start putting them in prisons. I guarantee you're going to be marked, and that's just a reality that we have to live with. You think it can't happen here? You need to think again. I think we're seeing these things, the first fruits of that, if you want to call it that, and we have to fight for that. So I want to break bread here today in communion for Israel for this purpose. I wear my watchman shirt because we are watchmen. I want to read out of Psalm 121. I will lift up my eyes to the mountain from which shall my help come from. My help comes from the Lord who made heaven and earth, and he will not allow your foot to slip. He who keeps you will not slumber. Behold, he who keeps Israel will neither slumber nor sleep. The Lord is your keeper. The Lord is your shade on your right hand. The sun will not smite you by day, nor the moon by night. The Lord will protect you from all evil, and he will keep your soul. The Lord will guard your going out and your coming in from this time forward and forever. That's the God that's watching us, and that's the God that's watching Israel. We take this bread, remembering that Christ at Passover did this for us. He gave his life for us. He didn't deny that cup that he had to drink, the cup of pain, the cup of sacrifice, which he did, and his body being broken for us all so that we could do what we're doing today and the freedom we're doing it in. We thank you for that, Lord Jesus. We take and eat. And I take this cup and I remember, Lord, that cup that you drank, and we are the reward of your suffering. And Lord, Israel's land and the fact that they're in the land right now is a reward of your suffering as well. Lord, let it be finished. Let the work be completed, and let us be a part of partnering with you in the name of Yeshua. Amen and amen. Well, thank you for hanging in there for a whole hour. We had a good crowd today listening and watching. We appreciate this as well. Remind everybody, we're shifting to the Pipeline Report. Go, if you're not a member on the Facebook page, please go to Pipeline Report and find our page. Register there. You have to fill out a little app. It's real short. Just tell us who you are and where you're from, and we'll let you be a part of that page as well. We do news updates there, vetted news articles that you need to read, and also this report as well on our Pipeline YouTube page and a Rumble page. So thank you for that. For those of you who've been giving in first fruits, God bless you. We're going to keep doing that all the way through Pentecost. I gave the word yesterday. We're crossing over into a harvest season. As you're sowing for a harvest season come Pentecost. All right, God bless you. We'll be back here tomorrow at noon from our congregation doing worship, harp and bowl. We'll be doing it there. So God bless you. Have a good day. See you.